Hey everyone, before we get started, we just wanted to mention that we were invited to be part of a really cool video interview with Ken over at Sledgehammer Horror for his My First Horror Movie series. And if you are interested in learning more about the first experiences Joseph and I both had as children with horror films, please check it out. The link is posted below. Thanks.
That's Nick.
And that's Joseph. And tonight we're here to talk about The Nest, the sophomore film directed by Sean Durkin, which premiered at the 2020 Sundance Film Festival and will be released in some theaters and digital on demand September 18th, 2020.
Has this person done other movies?
Yes. This person is part of the Borderline film crew that Antonio Campos is. We just reviewed The Devil All the Time.
That's right.
But Sean Durkin's debut was 2011's Marcy May Marlene, which I think was one of the best debuts, if not films, of that decade.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this film just is about something a lot more kind of mundane and banal, if you will, than kind of the fresh surprise of that film, which is about a woman escaping a cult.
Oh.
But Sean Durkin also in 2013 directed an excellent UK set miniseries called South Cliff that I got to see at Toronto in one sitting. I think it's 4 hours. That I also definitely recommend taking a look at. But yeah, it's been 9 years since his first film.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm.
This movie is about a man named Rory, who's played by Jude Law.
Mm-hmm.
It's in the 80s, like Reagan 80s. We find him in New York with his wife, who's played by
Carrie Coon, whose name is Allison.
Allison, and their 2 children. They have a son who they have together, and then they have, Allison has an older daughter who is Rory's stepdaughter now.
Yes.
Okay. So Rory works in like finance. He like trades stocks. They have a beautiful home. It's very obvious Rory is sort of like an alpha, like sort of go-getter, very materialistic. We see Rory talking to Allison, telling her that he has an opportunity. And immediately she is put off by it. So it's clear that he has his schemes or has had his schemes and she's tired of it.
But his excuse was, well, we've lived here in New York to be near your family and I'm drying up here.
And he proposes that he's been offered a position in London from like a previous employer, which will like put them through the roof. But she says, I thought that where we are now was through the roof. Like I thought this was going to be it and we were happy here. But then he sort of makes a case for why they have to go, and they do. So we end up in London.
Well, Surrey, which is outside of London, in that country manor.
He leases a mansion. It's dilapidated, but it's a mansion. It's huge, way more than 4 people need. He also buys Allison a horse because we find her in New York like training horses, which seems to be very fulfilling for her. So he buys her a horse, a Mercedes. The kids are off to fancy schools, and he is off to work in this nice building in London, right? But things kind of devolve when he attends his first like social gathering, like networking event with Allison, and we witness him like just, how would you even refer to it? He's fronting on everybody.
Oh, yeah.
He is bigger than he is and talking about his vacation homes and this and that. And it's very obvious in Allison's eyes that she's just like really put off by it.
Yeah.
Like just sick of it. He proposes to his employer because he's been working on like a deal to sell the company that he works for now, this London-based company, to a company in Chicago. And he's very excited about it. He's pitching it to his boss, like saying like, this will set you up millions of dollars. The future is now, and if you don't jump on board, you're gonna lose your business.
And it's because at the end of the year, London is set to, the laws are changing.
Something's changing in the sort of like commodities that they work in.
The deregulation.
Something that I don't understand. like there's an opportunity to kind of grow in that market. So his boss says, okay, I'll take the meeting. Well, Rory counts his chickens before they hatch, or whatever that saying is. So he, with only like 600 pounds in the bank, takes his wife to go look at like some fancy penthouse in London as like a second home when they have literally no money. Because also, she gets a call from a contractor who's working on a horse stable on their property.
No, she has to call them. She's like, I haven't seen you.
That's right. She hasn't seen anyone working on this horse stable. She calls and he's like, yeah, that check you wrote, your husband wrote, bounced. He said he was going to give me a new one. He hasn't. And I'm not working on this thing until you pay me. It's a lot of money. She does end up paying it. But she has an attitude, obviously. They go look at this penthouse. She kind of blows up at him and says, like, we're not going to do this. There's a very interesting dinner scene afterwards where she kind of tries him, like embarrasses him in front of a waiter. The deal falls through. So like time has passed and Rory has banked on this deal happening. So he finally confronts his boss like, hey, what happened? And his boss says, I passed. And Rory like blows up because he was really banking on.
Yeah, he's kind of screwed now.
Yeah, he's screwed. So we find his boss basically tells him like, you're good at whatever you do, like trading stocks, so just stick to that, you'll be fine. So we find him at like another sort of like business dinner with his colleague and some potential clients. And Allison is there with him. She embarrasses him because once again, he's fronting on these people like he does all these things. And she's like, he's lying, he doesn't do any of that. And then she leaves, like she walks out on dinner. She ends up going to like a nightclub, dancing all night, drinking, getting drunk, driving home. During that time, Rory leaves the dinner and his colleague says, you know what, we're done. Because these clients thought you were full of shit. They said they don't want to work with you, only me, so we're done. So of course, Rory's upset. He hops in a cab to head home. In an also really interesting scene, he has an exchange with the cab driver where he's talking about his priorities and his family. And the cab driver says, okay, you obviously ain't shit and you don't have any money, so I'm dropping you off like in the middle of nowhere because you're not going to pay me.
Right.
This is where the movie takes an interesting turn because, you know, there's only like 10 minutes left when this happens. I assume that because we see, while both of these things are happening, we see Allison driving drunk down this long road that Rory's been dropped off on. So I assume that she might hit him and kill him, but she doesn't. He ends up walking home. She ends up getting home. They have breakfast together with their 2 kids, and he basically says he's sorry, he needs to do better, and that's the end.
Well, he starts doing his
She
spiel,
tries to do his
and
shtick
she
about...
stops him,
Yeah.
and then he kind of laughs, and that's basically it.
So, go ahead.
Well, the way it starts off is there's almost this picture-perfect family in the age of excess, because there's soccer, she's doing this horseback training, one of the kids is in swimming, and like everything, all the pieces seem to be in their place, so it's like, why would you mess with this kind of? There's some interesting undertones about family as well, because Wendy Crewson pops up as just a second as Allison's mother, and basically like they're drinking wine and Allison has some trepidation about the move, and she's just like, well, you have a husband, you don't have to make any choices for yourself anymore, like it's all gravy here. And then what's even more interesting is in London, Jude Law visits his mother, played by Reid, who we also just saw as Orlando Bloom's mom in Retaliation. And from a really great Roger Michelle film called Mother as well. He hasn't spoken to. She doesn't even know she has a grandson.
He hasn't spoken to her in like a decade.
Which to me, I think that is one of the best scenes featuring Law, because Carrie Coon, I think, kind of owns this movie overall.
They both do a very good job.
They do. I kept thinking, and this is because of Durkin's previous films, which are very dark, violent films. I thought this was going to develop into more of a thriller territory than it does.
Is it being classified as or marketed as a thriller?
I don't think so.
Oh, okay.
I just think that...
Because it's not.
Even the title sequence, when the title comes out, looks like a 1980s horror film. And the nest, the egg nest, the
So some of the symbolism, the horse. So when they get to London and Rory buys Allison the horse and she's grown very attached to it. There's a scene where it's late at night and we hear the horse sort of react like maybe it's in pain. And the next day, Allison's riding the horse and the horse collapses and ultimately dies. But we never really learn what happened to the horse. I assume that Rory did something to the horse. But then towards the end of the film, because Allison makes it back home that drunk driving night, she gets home before Rory, obviously. And the son,
Benjamin, played by Charlie Shotwell.
he says, I have to show you something, because she had the horse buried like on their property. Like a forklift or a bulldozer like dug a big hole, dropped the horse in and buried it. But then the little son shows her the horse and the horse is like in a shallow grave. I was very confused by that.
I think that's because, that incident with the horse happens while Jude Law is off wheeling and dealing, so he doesn't come home for the night, and he wasn't able to call because their phone lines were shut off because they didn't pay the bill. And she explains, what had happened, this extreme distressing situation with the horse, and he gets upset because he says we can sue.
I paid all this money.
We
for
paid all the money.
Horse.
They gave us a lame horse. They gave us a diseased horse, and I need to have it tested. And she's like, well, it's buried already. So I think that he's desperate for money. I think he dug that horse up enough to take some samples or something, perhaps.
Interesting.
And also the horse is also, as we were discussing, representative of her own complicity in winding up in this situation where she's allowed this man who clearly doesn't know what he's doing, who's faking it till he makes it, to get them in this situation.
There's another good scene that's in the trailer where Allison kind of confronts Rory and says, like, why are you like this? Like, when is enough enough? And he's like, I deserve everything. I had a shitty childhood. I deserve everything I want and I'm going to get it. And then he kind of rails in on her and says, like, when I met you, you were broke, living in a 1-bedroom apartment with your daughter. And then I brought you, this beautiful life and you didn't seem to have any complaints. And now all of a sudden you have a problem. Well, you don't contribute shit, basically. I thought that was very interesting.
Well,
because they both seem like, I think the strength in the story is their relationship. Like that story, because it is like they're both complicit in wanting maybe more than they should have, more than what they needed to be happy.
Well, it's
like they could have been happy at a point, but they went past that.
Well, that's interesting because all those studies done about what kind of an income you really need to be happy. But here it is in the 80s, in the age of excess, and you see all these things around you. This is a man who wants to be like that character Leonardo DiCaprio plays in Wolf of Wall Street. This is the greed, what greed has done to people, and he thinks that he has learned the ways of Wall Street and is going to take them over to London, I think, and make a killing. I love how you notice the difference in how it's shot. The cinematographer is Hungarian Mátyás Erdély, sorry for mispronouncing his name, who has shot the 2 films directed by Laszlo Nemes, Son of Saul, which is a particularly grueling film. He also shot Durkin's Southcliffe. But everything's kind of in long shot until they get to London, and as things get tighter around them economically, that's when we start getting a lot of close-ups. We start seeing, like, you can see Jude Law's pores. We're so close up on him, like you can see the sweat, which I found interesting as their life is closing in on them. So is the camera.
Oh yeah, I think the film looks good. The performances are strong. I am not rating this film as high as I think I wanted to initially, because the ending, I think, was building up to something that didn't happen.
Sure. Well,
because after the dinner scene in the end, when they're like, when Allison goes to party and then she's driving drunk, and then Rory trying to get home, I think there was a lot of build-up there that just left me feeling very flat.
Sure. I think that would have been the predictable route, though, to have him killed by her drunk driving, because throughout the film I agree. I was thinking a lot of The Ice Storm, which is set a decade before in New Haven, Connecticut, but that film ends tragically with, I think the Elijah Wood character dies, but in these people's malaise, that are culturally related to shifting tones and political agendas and blah blah blah. But I'm fine that it didn't do that. I think the strength in some of the other scenes makes up for that anyway. Like when she goes to pick up her son from school and he's crying, and like I really like the bond that it builds between Benjamin and Allison, and also that dinner scene is pretty amazing.
Yeah, it's well done. And I don't know that I needed like something dramatic to happen at the end. I just think that I kind of felt like I was being taken for a ride,
Sure.
like literally, and to just end up where we ended up, which is like back to, I guess, square one.
It felt like a very well done adaptation. Durkin wrote it of some literary piece. Like I thought of F. Scott Fitzgerald. I know another critic had brought this up because I've read it, but Henry James really, once I read that, I'm like, yeah, Henry James, like especially kind of a reverse of the Europeans, maybe even a little bit, but.
What would you give this film?
And Carrie Coon, you said, reminded you of Mira Sorvino, which I thought was interesting.
She really does. She
Yeah.
really does. There are a few scenes where her hair and makeup are right, and it, like, yeah.
Yeah. I would give it 3.5 out of 5.
I would give it 3 out of 5.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.